As we're sitting up here talking, it's really just the brightness of the lights coming in. My name's Janel, Laravie, and I'm the founder of Chacka Marketing. We're a paid search agency headquartered in Tampa, Florida. And I'm going to allow each of my panelists to kind of introduce themselves and speak a little bit to what their voice is going to be on the panel here today.
Hi everyone, I am Teresa, Caro. I'm VP of Social Marketing for an agency called Engauge. We are a full-service marketing agency in Atlanta, Columbus, Ohio, Pittsburgh, and Orlando. And I am going to be the voice of the social marketer who may or may not be working with the search marketer.
Hi, my name is Greg Cypes. I am the technical strategist and data insights guy at AddThis. We are the largest social sharing platform on the net. We're on 14 million websites and see 1.3 billion unique users a month. And I'm going to bring the social trends angle to the panel.
Hi, I'm Jon Maxson. I am a senior director in our natural search practice at iCrossing, based in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So happy to be up here for a little snow and cold weather. And I bring the voice of really the search practitioner who may or may not be working with the social side of the house. So a different perspective, but I'm happy to be here.
I'm Steve Goldner, AKA Social Steve. I head up the social marketing practice at Ryan Partnership, which is a marketing agency primarily aimed at B2C consumers. And the perspective that I'll bring to the panel is that much of what we do at Ryan is very much customer-centric focused and looking at how they influence marketing decisions.
Hi, I'm Jim Yu. I'm the founder of BrightEdge. We're a leading enterprise SEO platform. We work with over 3,200 of the top brands on optimizing their search strategies as well as how that ties to social. So the perspective that I'm going to be bringing is the intersection between sort of search and social and how the two come together.
Great, thanks everyone. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of kick off here today and talk about is that when we all got together and had a conversation, Greg was actually able to share with us some research and some data that they have on social sharing. So Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about that and where are people actually sharing? So when they find something on a site.
Yeah, so we measure all sharing. So over across 300 services worldwide. We just released our year-end report. The most interesting thing we saw this year, Facebook sharing was actually down for the first time ever, 1%, and that was probably at the expense of Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram. So there's a real trend, and what's common about Pinterest, Twitter, and Instagram is that they really excel on mobile. So you can also draw another conclusion that mobile and mobile sharing is more and more important as we go forward. One example, just to tie back to the Grammys for a second, we did a big analysis during the Grammys last year, and actually search was down in the US 3% during the Grammys, but sharing was up 20% during the hours that the Grammys were on from 8 to 11 Eastern. So really, really interesting trend in the way people are interacting and engaging socially during live events and just in general on mobile.
From the agency perspective, what are you hearing from clients? So I'll go with Teresa and Jon and Steve, if you guys can kind of weigh in here. What are you guys seeing, when clients say, I'm concerned about my social presence or how I'm appearing socially, what sites are they concerned with? Are they concerned about Pinterest, or are they so focused on Facebook?
So the 800-pound gorilla is still Facebook. That's where everybody is at this point. That's where usually the clients, they come to us start. They want us, they see what Greg sees, that they're not growing as fast as they used to be. The engagement isn't there. Facebook really changed the way everything is done in March when they switched to timeline. And a lot of clients are trying to figure out how to get that engagement, that conversation back, that sharing back. So that's number one. Twitter is typically number two. YouTube's really interesting in that it's a great place to post videos from the advertising department, but it's usually from a prioritization perspective, something that's on the list of something they know they need to organize and they need to optimize. It's a great way from an SEO perspective to get presence, but it's third on the list. Pinterest and Instagram at this point, especially now that Instagram has brand pages, are one of those things that, so social is very mature. We consider it a mature channel. It's something that needs to be integrated into all of our marketing efforts. But as with everything, you want to test a specific aspect of what you're doing. Pinterest and Instagram are still in the sort of testing, let's figure it out, let's see if we can even support it, because it requires a certain amount of assets and content.
Yeah, I would just add to that that every client is extremely bullish on having a strong Facebook presence. And I think it is the big gorilla there, but it's not necessarily the best marketing tool. So for instance, everyone wants to increase their likes. Well, that's really not meaningful, because even Facebook said that of your likes, when you post something, only 16% actually see the posting. So one of the emphasis that I try and bring to them is that you've got to up the engagement. If you look at a parameter called talking about this, that increases the likelihood that people will see your post. And then the other aspect is, so everyone's always very bullish on Facebook. I always ask the rhetorical question, and I say, you know, I don't care what your brand is. Let's take bicycling for an example. If you were to do a monitoring of where conversations are happening on bicycling, do you think there will be more conversations happening on your brand's digital assets or off of your brand's digital assets, finding those conversations outside of your world? And it's a rhetorical question, because obviously there's a lot more conversations happening off of your assets. So what's really important, and I think this point was brought up in the Grammys, is to go where the conversation's happening. Have conversations there, and then slowly pull people to your digital assets. That's one of the things that I really try to emphasize with my clients.
Yeah, and I think just to extend on that, because I think it's really important in terms of how Facebook is maturing this year, and how there's a lot of interesting stats out there of people have, you know, you look at Coca-Cola with 55 million. How many are actually fans of Coca-Cola? And who are those fans, and how do you target that particular audience? It goes back to this whole idea of Facebook's maturing. It's there. We need to be more targeted. We need to understand who that audience is. If they are the right audience, how do we get the right audience? And then what's really interesting is, so Facebook apparently hired someone from Google, so they're trying to optimize how they're found in search. And that whole search engine kind of area, they claimed that they were going to be the next big search engine. It hasn't really panned out yet. But they're still working on it. So again, going back to that maturity piece, it'll be very interesting to watch to see what Facebook does next.
So conversely, not going directly to the social sites, if we can talk a little bit, maybe from Jon and Jim, about what social sites are important from a natural search optimization standpoint. What sites are important to have a presence on for your brand reputation and for things like that, and really just owning the results from a natural standpoint.
Sure, I'll start off. Just so, if you're in the U.S., obviously Google is your main concern from a search standpoint. So that's where the conversation starts with Google+. You didn't hear that spoken about too much this morning, except for the Hangout feature, which is great and unique. And you haven't heard that spoken by the other kind of social strategists here, because, as we all know, there's not the level of engagement there. There's not the user base. And so it's, from a social standpoint, you question whether it makes sense to spend your time, your dollars, engaging people there. But from a search standpoint, that's really the lens that Google is now applying to sharing. You probably know, if you know anything about search, that there's that linking layer that applies to kind of how well you perform in search. So you can have the best content, but if no one's linking to it, it doesn't perform well. And so as more of that linking activity has moved into social networks, Google has struggled to really kind of get a piece of that and tell what's going on. And so they have limited access to Facebook, limited access to Twitter, and so hence their creation of Google+. So from a search standpoint, kind of what we advise marketers is, be present there like you would anywhere else. You may not have the same level of engagement from a social standpoint, but we can show you how it's helping you from a search standpoint. Because if you were signed into Google and you have a Google Plus account, you see when you're just searching, you see a lot of that like activity, people who have +1 content. And so to me as a brand, I want to be present when people are searching for things that may not be 100% related to my brand. I'm there in those search results because I'm present on Google Plus. So that's really kind of the start of an argument to be present on Google Plus. I'll let Jim kind of weigh in on maybe some other opportunities.
Yeah, so there's a couple components that we've seen. I think the first is sort of how social engagement can help your search rankings. So from that perspective, we've done a bunch of case studies. We actually work closely with Twitter on and putting a series of those out. And what we've certainly seen is both Twitter and Facebook engagement do help your search rankings, right? Specifically, if you're driving social engagement to landing pages where you're trying to drive those to rank better, it seems to have a very clear effect of driving better authority to those pages that then result in better rankings. And so from driving a rank perspective, we were able to see in the case of Tiny Prints and Shutterfly, a 47% increase in search rankings as a result of driving social engagement in a targeted way to pages where you wanted to drive better search rankings. So we see huge opportunities of leveraging social engagement because that is a very important new signal for driving better search rankings, and we've seen that effect. There's a second component which I think is important as well, is Google Plus. But that is a little different than driving better search rankings. We haven't seen as big an impact in the data set on Google Plus really being able to, Google Plus engagement being able to drive better search rankings. But one thing is very clear, like when you look at, and we track this very closely, when you look at Google Plus, the areas where that can really help is one, there's a series of brand terms that clearly now, with the introduction of Google Search Plus Your World, you have a lot better control of what's showing up in the SERP page, because on the right-hand side for your brand term, if you're updating your Google Plus, that is like a portion of the SERP that you now control, right? And you can post messages to that and really update that, and you can see that with the brands that have done a good job of that. The second thing that's very clear on Google Plus is that Google is more and more, it looks like they're integrating a lot of the other dimensions into Google Plus. So whether it's author profiles or better visibility in the specific SERP descriptions, right? There's a lot more integration in those areas. And beyond that, it looks like there's even further integration into Google Plus of things like, it looks like some of the other sort of profiles that they're starting to drive in that direction as well. So definitely think Google Plus is important as well.
Steve, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, besides the technical aspects of the relationships of SEO and social, there's the behavioral aspects from the user community. And I think what's really important is that social can influence what the behavior is for searching. So for instance, back to the bicycling example, if you are Trek Bikes and you're putting out compelling content and that gets shared, when someone searches for a mountain bike, they might go to a long tail search which says Trek mountain bike as opposed to just a mountain bike. So the behavioral aspect and the social influence is really important. The second part, while Google Plus is not nearly what Facebook is in usage patterns, I think the linkage of what they do in social and search is extremely compelling. So for instance, if you're in my circle, my Google circle, and I've talked about a topic that you search for, on the search, what I've talked about is going to trump the SEO algorithm for Google. So if that begins to grow as a platform as social, I think that will be that much more powerful.
So how do you measure success, and maybe even how do you measure failure when it comes to looking at your efforts between search and social? So feel free to talk about successes or failures or both. Who wants?
So I could give a 15-second answer to that and let others jump in. Social, and once again I represent the social perspective. Social has to be measured, and social can be measured. There's a lot of noise about it. It can be measured in awareness, consideration, loyalty, and advocacy. And there's a number of parameters that we measure in each of those categories that give clients a real feel for, is social doing anything for us?
And I would completely agree with you. The one big important piece, and this will be the no-does statement of the conference, is social needs to be integrated into everything that you do. The Grammys presentation was a perfect example of that. It was a conversation about social, but if you look, there was mobile from a device perspective, there was advertising, it was all integrated together. So social it must be measured and it must be optimized at that level. It was interesting to hear him say that's the next step of him getting down and what specifically is working and what isn't. But then you need to be looking at it holistically. And then the other thing too, and this is an interesting cultural difference between search marketers and social marketers, is because we're there for the relationship building and the conversation, we're in it for the long haul. Versus search marketers, depending on the consideration set for what you're trying to promote, is a lot shorter. And a lot of times, we're very direct response focused. So there's a definite cultural difference in how we look at things.
I would also, I'd add that depending upon the brand or what you're offering as a publisher, it matters in terms of your social strategy. So for example, in the financial world or in the travel world or in autos where vehicles are, can be upwards of $200,000 to purchase, that having a strategy that's only based on Facebook or Twitter or the typical social networks that you're measuring, you might see a very low ROI. And that's because the most popular way to share is people copying the URL out of their address bar and pasting it into IMs and emails. And the reason in those particular categories that's important to note is that if I'm gonna go buy a $50,000 car, I'm not gonna post that on Facebook. I hate to tell the auto manufacturers that, that's the truth. The truth is that I'm copying the URL and I'm pasting it into an email to my wife to get her opinion on the car, or she may do the same to me. And the same thing with travel or other expensive purchases. And this has ramifications downstream in search, right? So Bing said, okay, I'm going to have tight Facebook integration into Bing. That's great, except that when I go to Bing and I'm searching for that $50,000 car, it's a little bit of an echo chamber because no one's really gonna be sharing that. Those kinds of things aren't shared at the same volume via Facebook as they are other ways. So in Google's play with Google+, what's interesting is that that car manufacturer may have a really strong Google+ presence on their brand page. And the ROI for them on Google in search results via the social ROI may be higher than on Bing. And so I think it's interesting that depending upon the brand and what you're marketing, it does matter in your social strategy. And the publishers who have address bar sharing turned on using our product definitely see that. 97% of their traffic socially back is actually usually through address bar sharing, not Facebook, not Twitter.
I would just chime in on the direct response question. We do see a lot of people that try to approach social from a search standpoint, which I think as you've gotten the vibe this morning is not the way to do it. We see a lot of people that try and say, well, my search efforts get me this much direct response, and so social is just another space where I can get people to buy my stuff. And I thought the perspective this morning that social's about discovery and community is right on. So approaching social from that lens of, it could be two different types of content. The financial services perspective, we have financial services clients who, in search all day long, we're selling checking accounts, we're selling credit cards. When you go to social and look at what they're doing in social, they're not doing any of that. They're talking about what are their customers doing this weekend, and what are they dreaming about. And it's all about discovery, building that community in social, which then kind of pays those dividends back in search results, whether you're on Bing or Google.
Yeah, just to reinforce what Jon just said, and not to put words in your mouth, but social's not a great tool at conversion and direct sales. And when I listed the parameters that we measure, you can kind of read into that the sales marketing funnel, which was awareness, consideration. I did not say conversion. I said post-conversion loyalty and advocacy. So literally, we're taking out that direct sale component of it. And if someone says, so then what's the value of social? Recognize that those four things, awareness, consideration, loyalty, and advocacy, all tee up sales.
Agreed.
And I do think there's a lot of things you can leverage between specific data sets between the two channels, right? So for example, specifically in search, you have this great data set on content you already have that is relevant for specific topics, right? Because you know what keywords and what pages you have. So you know what content you have that's relevant. So that can inform sort of what you're driving that engagement towards. That's one sort of area where we've seen a lot of great impact. And the second area is that with, for example, in social, you have another rich data set that can inform search. So, for example, Twitter has an amazing data set around trends and what, at a very sort of fine-grained level, right? So it gives you another data set that's much better than regular search volume to understand what's actually happening out there, that is trending that you can drive engagement towards. So I think there are two very interesting and intertwined data sets that you can leverage to get more ROI out of the channels.
I'm curious if anyone's actually tried this along the lines of the question Lori asked Evan a minute ago around whether or not you've used paid search for trivia questions, using paid search for hashtags, promoted hashtags. So if you know you're going to promote a hashtag on Twitter during a live event, does it make sense to actually do any paid search around that? I'm curious because I haven't heard anyone do that yet, but if anyone has, I'd love to know whether that worked.
Personally, I was going to say I have seen brands utilize their site links on their branded keyword terms to promote different things that are short-lived. So not specifically a hashtag, but in similar situations. One of the things that we were just kind of discussing, and that Greg, you had mentioned to us earlier, you actually have some information as to what keywords drive the shares. So I think that's a really interesting, a really interesting piece of information. So if you know what actual search terms are triggering a search result, someone's clicking on that and then choosing to share that content, that's another valuable insight as to what's driving the sharing. And it's kind of the reverse of social driving search, but search driving social.
Yeah, I guess it's as close to a conversion. It's just the way a publisher measures a conversion, a traditional publisher as a conversion. Can we get people who are coming in through certain search terms to convert on specific goals? So whether that's sharing or following the brand, that's one technique that we see publishers using to pretty good effect today.
So something interesting, Teresa, that you said was that if you have 55 million fans and really understanding more about those fans, there are a lot of companies that probably have a lot of people that really aren't good fans. So I actually worked with a client once that had a huge amount of fans on Facebook that they hadn't done any age targeting, and they had a lot of people that were not going to buy from them. They were just far too young. It was too high end of a product. How do you do fan cleanup? Is there fan cleanup?
Well, and that's what's really nice about Facebook right now is that you have the customer audience targeting that they've introduced. There's also third-party providers that are starting to overlay survey data into that cat, as they like to call it. And so fan cleanup is you using paid media, paid within Facebook, to start targeting the people that should be your audience. Because the interesting thing about Facebook at this point, and we have a few brands, and you just need to look at our site to figure out which ones they are, that the people on Facebook aren't exactly happy with them. And what happens is those are the people that we call them trolls in the social space, end up trolling around, looking for really benign posts around what's going on that weekend, or catering or what have you, and then saying something negative. And so from an EdgeRank perspective, EdgeRank gets trained, because EdgeRank's not looking at sentiment, it gets trained that these people must really like that particular brand, and so then that brand ends up seeing a lot of your advertising. So again, going back to Facebook is popping up, is getting to be towards more socially mature. It's better understanding who your audience is. Are they advocates? Are they detractors? Are these detractors that you can make into advocates, or are they specifically trolls? Are they an audience that's on Facebook because you've done a lot of sweepstakes on concert giveaways, but they may not necessarily be drinking drinking your alcohol or what have you. So you got a whole bunch of people who love concerts but don't like tequila on your Facebook page. It's all of those things that we need to be taking a closer look at, and then targeting them and training EdgeRank so it's your advocates who are most likely to either be your customers or potentially be your customers in there. What Greg talked about in terms of understanding which keywords are the ones that have most likely to share, that's really fascinating, because again, now you're looking at who's that audience, who are those people most likely to be your customers, who's most likely to be your advocate and extend your reach. In the social space, we like to say content is your currency and your customers are your salespeople. Well, figuring out how to tap into those salespeople are going to get you to sales. You just have to be in it for the long haul.
I think some of those linguistic clues can be one of the biggest kind of spillovers between search and social, because social gives you kind of an immediate lens into what kind of language resonates with your customers and with your fans and with just people who might become engaged with you. And you can apply that immediately then to your search efforts, whether it's paid or natural search, and vice versa. Just the things that you learn from the measurability of paid search can help you talk about those same topics in social. I've seen restaurant brands do this and travel brands where they'll test, they'll post an image and ask something about that image, and a couple weeks later they'll post the same image but ask something completely different about it, and you can get kind of clear differences on what's working better, what resonates more with people, whether it's the format of what you're doing or the actual keywords that you're using to talk about that image.
So when we talk about social not being a direct response channel and search being more of a direct response channel, how should companies be approaching their fan base? So they've built up their fans, they've built up their followers. How do they use it? And is monetizing it an option, or should they explicitly be using them as their advocates?
So I define something called the social media A path related to that. And as a brand, the first thing I want to do is I want to get your attention. Then I want you to be attracted to me. Then I want you to build affinity for me. Those that build affinity for me I look to be part of my audience and literally opt in. And a subset of that audience becomes advocates. I define the power users. So that's very much a relationship building. So when you ask that question as far as, where do we go after our fans and where do we monetize them, it really depends where they are in that relationship building of this psychodemographic, if you will. So if I'm just getting your attention today and I said to you, you should come to Ryan Partnership and we can help you with our brand, that would be totally inappropriate. Hopefully, as a brand, what I'm doing is I'm getting your attention. Maybe we start a conversation, you see some of my content, you come to be part of my audience, and then eventually I connect with you deeper on advocacy. So the whole goal of where to have the call to action, if you will, for the monetization really depends where we are in a relationship. It's very much like personal relationships. I don't want to get off topic here, but you could ask for something too much in a personal relationship way too quick, and someone say, who the heck are you? And you scare them off. Well, certainly.
Saying I love you on the second date?
Well, I was actually thinking something a little deeper than that. But anyway, what I was saying is it's very much that relationship building. So think about that. If you start to like a brand and they say, buy one of this, you're turned off immediately. If you're building trust and you see they care about you, they're engaging with you, then it becomes an opportunity for monetization. And to Teresa's point, that really isn't necessarily only a social element. That's integration in everything else that you're doing in marketing. So social can be the setup for that call to action for monetization, but the integration, don't look at social separately. Integrate it. Maybe one of your other marketing channels is the channel that asks to buy, email or something along that.
Yeah, we like to call social as that connective tissue, or if the word tissue grosses you out, that connective thread.
Okay, so social is for coddling and search is for buying, right?
It's not black and white, but if you had to you know,
Well, and what-
maybe. I mean, there's gray area. The point I'm just trying to make is, yeah, social can be successful in selling. You look at programs like Dell. Dell has done an amazing job selling with social. It doesn't work all the ways, but it is about building trust first before trying to sell. And it is about transparency and authenticity. I know everyone's heard those buzzwords a million times in social, but it could not be more true. I mean, if I want you to appeal to me as a brand, I have to strongly appear that I care about you.
So I know we are almost actually out of time up here on our panel, and we have a ton more questions that we wanted to get through. But I'm thinking maybe I should open it up and see if there are any audience questions really quickly, and if not, we can kind of dive into one or two more.
Can we ask
Yeah.
the audience a question?
The audience, the question, the social counterparts.
Yes.
Okay, so assuming that most people in here are predominantly search marketers, how many of you actually work closely with your social counterparts?
Wow, that's
That's great.
That's great. That's really great.
And how many feel so siloed from, from your social counterparts, or there's not a social counterpart?
All right, well, you guys just sort of buck the trend right there. Or you're ahead of the trend of what's going to be big in 2013.
Yeah, everybody give yourselves a hand. Okay, were there any questions? Okay, the reason we wanted to ask that question, and it's actually something I wanted to jump into a little bit, I know usually the larger the company, the larger the segmentation in the roles. And we wanted to ask that question because it is something that we kind of all discuss that we see a lot, that the person responsible for search isn't responsible for social. So I just wanted to kind of get everybody's thoughts on that. I know, Teresa, you think this is the big thing, right? This is what we need.
Well, in my mind, it comes back to what I said earlier in this conversation, is this whole idea of the person responsible for social is all about engagement and conversation and relationships, and the person responsible for search doesn't have that same focus necessarily unless you're really geeking out and getting into those keywords for existing customers. But it's just understanding those cultural differences, although it looks like I'm preaching to the choir here, so you guys get that already.
Now, Jim, you work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, so do you want to weigh in on what you see happening?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think we're definitely seeing more of an understanding of this dimension, but it typically, with a lot of our customers, reports into different areas within the organization, right? So we see a lot of times where search reports into either online marketing or acquisition around sort of driving conversions and so forth, whereas social reports into brand, right? And oftentimes in a lot of the enterprise clients that we work with, they report into completely different business units, and so the KPIs and the drivers are pretty different, and even if there is some level of collaboration, it's happening more tactically than it is a part of a strategic plan where they're trying to navigate the whole funnel.
I mean, in our clients, and we have a mix of everyone from brands to traditional publishers. One of the trends we definitely see as we exit this year is everyone is starting to work closer together in different verticals around paid, own, and earn, right? And it used to be those things were all sort of different. In fact, I had a meeting a couple weeks ago with a client who actually had the words paid and earned in her title, but not owned. But still, she at least met with the owned people at that company. But it's getting there. We're starting to see that bridge across those chasms that existed earlier this year.
Yeah, and just to leverage that, the own part, one thing we haven't talked much about, the intersection of SEO and social should be content marketing. So for instance, you develop content marketing for SEO reasons, obviously, and content is the core of social. You're not going to have sharing without content. A phrase that I use is content used to be king, conversations around content. Content is not king. Conversations around content used to be king. Sharing content is now king. So, and that's a draw to SEO, definitely.
Great. So I did want to just close up here and wrap up. I know all of us will be, I think most of us here are going to be here till the end of the day, so if there's anything anybody wants to talk about. And then also, quick plug for, oh.
You can't see because of the light.
Okay. Yeah, let's do one question, and while we're getting you a microphone over there, I'll just make the announcement. Rob Garner from iCrossing was originally going to be on this panel, but he was sick, and Jon came in his place. He has a few of Rob's recently published book. There were some here at the conference. They went really quickly. So if anybody wants a copy of the book, see Jon after the panel's over. He does have a few copies, and it's a really great book.
And that's a great lead into my question. I got the book a few weeks ago. It's fantastic, but I was very surprised that email was mentioned in half a paragraph on page 299. And Steve, you just mentioned it's all about content marketing today. And it's just interesting to me that I was here the early part of the week, there was Email Insiders, where the email people talked about email and social and how we have to own social. And then I come to the Search Insiders, and it's about search and social and search, and there's this stepchild of social. And my question is, why don't any of you think about email as a key component to what you do, content marketing?
I mean, we definitely see that trend in clients. We didn't talk about that, but 2013, brands are trying to regain or retake back that channel. It's not limited to 140 characters. They don't have to pay to reach more customers. They have their email lists. And so, and so it's, I think, going to be a channel in 2013 that sort of what's old is new.
Yeah, I would say that we think about email all the time. Our social people sit across from our email people. We're constantly integrating the two. It just wasn't mentioned because you guys were at a search conference. But I think that would be really interesting from a MediaPost perspective of having a conference around paid, owned, and earned, and all the different aspects of it that go into there. There's a whole other, you can get me going. Just ask Joe over here on that whole idea of owning your customer database versus renting it from Facebook.
Do we want to take one more question over here? We're making you work for it, Rob. If we can get one more person to ask a question on this side of the room, that would be great.
I wasn't going to ask a question, but the back and forth about email kind of sparked my interest. Can you touch on why you think email is an important, maybe underutilized platform? Because from my perspective, it feels like there's so many options, there's so many opportunities to reach people, and email, I think people, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm really interested in your thoughts here, but my experience has been that consumers are conditioned to kind of ignore emails now because we're so flooded, and I know personally I can't be bothered with an email from somebody or a company that I'm not familiar with. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on that.
So I had a conversation this week in LA with a client about this, and it's all about, at the end of the day, their comment was spray and pray, that the bounce rate on email is still better than however many fans they have on Facebook that get to see that post, or on Twitter that that get to see that post in a day. So it's all about, basically, to them, just getting their message out there to as many channels as possible. And the fact is that the ROI on email for them, and it's probably a client by client or vertical by vertical, result, but the ROI was better just because they own that channel and they can have that message tailored really to that channel.
Yeah, I mean, once you kind of own the customer, it's pennies to put out a message, and I think you're right. Me personally, I ignore it. There is a brand that I have actually bought from probably for the last 3-4 years, holiday gifts, and sent out like bulk orders of holiday gifts from this company. They own multiple brands, and I've been getting hit with an email every day in holiday season for every single one of their brands. And I'm so turned off that I've already unsubscribed from 2, and I won't be ordering this year because I've been annoyed. So, but there are brands that when I get occasional emails from that I do respond to, and I think that every single person has those 1 or 2 brands that they are going to respond to, and that's why it still works to spam your customers.
Yeah, I would just say that email is going to change. When we talked about content, email in the past has been send it out to 1 million people. If it hits 1,000, that's a good ROI because of the pennies. But if you look at what I mentioned, that content marketing is really important, and I think content in 2012, everyone got a grasp of. In 2013, I think content now needs to move to contextual content, relevant to the individuals, as opposed to a complete shove down the throat 1 million areas. If I can hit you with an email, what you really care about, which is different than her, that will be more compelling for the audience you're trying to grab.
Yeah, and I think one of the great examples of this is the social networks themselves, right? If you think about how Facebook and Twitter drive re-engagement, they use email a lot, right? It's in product, it's a part of the acquisition funnel, and it's a part of the re-engagement process. But I think it's a very different way to use email, but it's a very effective way to keep driving people back.
And then one more thing that I wanted to add is that I think with custom audiences now in Facebook, that it gives you a whole new way to basically kind of combine email marketing with paid advertising, and you kind of making that your customized list of your customers to target via Facebook. It improves what you can do in Facebook, but it also allows you to better leverage your existing customer database without spamming them. So I think that there's a new hybrid there.
And so really the key is, to sum it all up, is that there's good marketing and bad marketing. I believe all of you were having a heated debate over the kind of paid search where you buy, all of your products are out there, I believe, if I was reading the tweets correctly. It's the same thing for the spam you're getting in email, and marketers are spamming people on social just as much. So it's good marketing, it's bad marketing, it's all about your goals and objectives. My big thing about email is that's your customer database. You own those customers as much as your customers want to be owned, versus you're renting them from a social perspective, and you have less of an opportunity to know who they are and whether or not they are your most valuable customer and worth your time. So that's how I would sum it up.
Great.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So